Well, Israel's war on Gaza has already killed more than 42,000 Palestinians, but just about 50 kilometres away, it's waging a parallel war in the occupied West Bank. Israeli forces and settlers have killed 751 Palestinians this past year alone. The latest escalation started in late August, with a large-scale military assault involving Israeli fighter jets, drones and thousands of soldiers, the likes of which have not been seen in over 2 decades. They placed cities under siege for days, destroying roads, tearing down electricity and communications lines, and obstructing access to food, water and hospitals. The territory is already dotted with ever-expanding illegal settlements, populated by right-wing Israelis, many with the goal of driving out Palestinians. Backed by Israeli forces, settler attacks have increased drastically, from killing Palestinians to burning their homes and farms. In July, the UN's top court ruled Israel's occupation of Palestinian land is illegal and should end. Yet, Israeli politicians have been clear in their intention to annex the West Bank. And Palestinians say, at the same time as the genocide is happening in Gaza, the violence in the occupied West Bank is causing irreversible damage. Nida Ibrahim begins our special coverage. An important note to our viewers, this report was filmed before Israel shut down our Ramallah offices, preventing Al Jazeera from operating in the occupied West Bank.
He was not a military target, his family says. Yet Tawfiq lay on the ground for hours, his body desecrated. Sireen Qandil's father was 83 years old and hardly a threat, she says, to the Israeli forces invading Jenin in the northern occupied West Bank.
He wanted to buy us bread. I told him the market was closed, but he insisted. I warned him, they'll kill you. If only I'd kept him at home.
Even homes are not safe in Palestine. Suna Sruji was inside her house in the Tul Karim refugee camp when Israeli forces began bulldozing the walls.
My son and I ran to this room. They saw us, but they didn't tell us to leave. We escaped through the back door to our neighbors. The next day, we returned to find our home burned. We don't know why.
During military operations in the past year alone, Israeli forces have demolished 6 times the number of homes in the occupied West Bank than they did in the past 10 years combined. Since October the 7th, the Israeli army and settlers have killed more than 700 Palestinians, nearly half of them in Jenin and Tul Karim. In September, Israeli soldiers were filmed kicking and pushing the bodies of Palestinians off a roof in Qabatia, near Jenin. But many Israeli violations take place away from cameras. The Israeli military says it's fighting armed Palestinians. These men have no leadership, training or resources, but say the occupation leaves them little choice but to fight back. Some say the unprecedented violence in the past year has another goal.
They claim they're after explosives, but we think the grand scheme is larger. They want to empty refugee camps. Then they'll target cities and villages all across the occupied West Bank.
While a genocide unfolds in Gaza, many here believe that Israel is implementing a decades-long vision in the occupied West Bank. One that seeks to eliminate Palestinians' aspirations and prevents them from ever having an independent state. Nida Ibrahim, Al Jazeera.
Introducing Mustafa Barghouti, who's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. He joins us here in the studio. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Barghouti. So the war on Gaza, as we've all been saying, has meant this accelerated annexation of chunks of the occupied West Bank, directly facilitated by the most hardened Zionist forces within Israel, who were previously on the fringes of Israeli politics, but are now very much in government. Just set the scene for us, what this means, what this slow creeping annexation, or accelerated annexation as it has become since October the 7th, means for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank.
Nothing of what we will say about the Israeli plans is hidden. It's declared officially by Israeli politicians, by Netanyahu himself, by ministers in the Israeli government. What we face here is a combination of 2 processes. The first one is that you have in Israel a fascist government, a truly fascist government supported by an increasing tendency towards fascism in the Israeli society, which means not only racism, but severe aggressive behavior that has no respect to the human life of any Palestinian. Second, you have a government that declares that its goal is not only to prevent the possibility of a Palestinian state or independence of Palestine, but their goal is to annex the West Bank, to Judaize the West Bank, to try to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians from all of Palestine, in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and everywhere. In other words, what many people have been illusioned with, which is the possibility of a compromise with the Zionist movement, are now discovering that what we face as Palestinians and what the world is watching is a reactivation of the same settler colonial Zionist project that kicked out 70% of the Palestinian people in the worst act of ethnic cleansing in 1948.
Given the absence of, as you've suggested, of a potential middle path, an absence of the voice of reason, given, as you say, the presence of this racist, ultra-Zionist government in Israel, I wonder then, what in your mind are the justified parameters of resistance in the occupied West Bank and indeed across the Palestinian territories?
The parameters are very clear. They are included in the international law, which says that any people who are under Israeli occupation or any occupation have the right to resist in all forms, including military forms, as long as they respect international law and international humanitarian law. The right to resistance is there. The funny thing and the strange thing and the sad thing, actually, is that so many Western government leaders keep talking about Israel's right to defend itself and never say Palestinian right to defend ourselves. Although we are the ones who are oppressed, we are the ones who are displaced, we are the ones who are under occupation, and we are the ones who are subjected to the worst system of apartheid. So the double standard here is so dramatic. And what they do is not only to say that Israel has the right to defend itself, they supply Israel with weapons, they supply Israel with financial aid, they supply Israel with political support to continue a system of oppression, occupation, apartheid, and now fascist behavior against the Palestinian people,
So
which reached the level of genocide, a true genocide, by all international parameters.
So you suggest, given the nature of the occupation, that any kind of affirmative resistance by Palestinian armed groups in the occupied West Bank against the occupying force is legitimate under international law? Are you saying also the targeting of Israeli settlers as well in the occupied West Bank? Are they legitimate targets?
In my opinion, military resistance should respect international law and international humanitarian law, which means you don't attack civilians, you don't attack children. But in general, the right of resistance is guaranteed by international law. And the big question here for us as Palestinians and for anybody who supports the rights of people for freedom, what can we do with this fascist Israeli government? In my opinion, this fascist Israeli government will not be restrained, and Netanyahu will not be restrained, who is now conducting a wide war all over the region, without, first of all, resistance, and second, without sanctions. And what we need from the international community is to transform the sanctions that are practiced at the level of the people to sanctions that would be
talking about sanctions. We've had
sanctions
after sanctions issued at the United Nations. We've had unilateral sanctions from United States, the United Kingdom against specific settler groups within the occupied West Bank. I mean, these are, given what we continue to see, these are toothless moves.
It's nothing. To take sanctions against 4 or 5 people means nothing. What should be sanctions is the Israeli government. What should be sanctioned is Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, who are themselves settlers and are ministers in the Israeli government, are running the process of land appropriation, settlement building, and annexation. And what we need here is a true action similar to what happened in other cases. Why the double standard? Why 11,000 sanctions on Russia in less than 2 months? And instead of punishing the Israelis here, they are supporting them. And in my opinion, the first thing that should happen is what the Spanish foreign minister said yesterday or today, that there should be military embargo on Israel. There should be immediate suspension of supplies of military weapons to the Israeli government, which is violating the laws, violating international law, and committing terrible crimes in Palestine, in Gaza, in West Bank, in Lebanon, and everywhere else, including, by the way, attacking people under occupation in the West Bank with airstrikes.
Let me ask you about other developments regionally as well. I wonder whether the spiraling tensions with Hezbollah, these continued attacks not only on the Dahia in southern Beirut, but also now in central Beirut, the attacks carried out by Iran on targets within Israel. Does that help? Does that hinder? Does that bring more security to Palestinians in the occupied West Bank?
I think Hezbollah has been very clear in three things. First of all, they don't target civilians. They concentrate only on military targets. Second, their whole confrontation with Israel could be stopped immediately, as they declared, if Israel stops the attacks on Gaza. But Israel wants to continue the attacks on Gaza and the attacks on Palestinians on the West Bank and isolate us from the rest of the region and then impose the Israeli will on everybody.
I want to talk about...
it's very interesting that...
Within the context of this, I want to talk about Palestinian unity in the time that we have here. Because in July, Fatah and Hamas signed this agreement in Beijing, didn't they, to end divisions, strengthen Palestinian unity. There have been, as we know, fierce differences between Fatah and Hamas, namely the recognition of the State of Israel, hopes of a two-state solution. Why was it important at that moment to show Palestinian unity?
Well, it wasn't Hamas and Fatah that signed the agreement. It was all the 14 Palestinian parties. I personally drafted that agreement with the approval of both of them. And that agreement spoke about forming immediately a national consensus government and a creation of a unified Palestinian leadership. This is so essential for us to face all these atrocities and also to face all these challenges. But unfortunately, the resolution, the agreement was good, but it was not implemented yet because the Palestinian Authority, up till now, did not make up its mind to start implementing what they have signed on. That is the issue.
And only, of course, a couple of weeks later, Ismail Haniyeh, Hamas's political chief, was assassinated in Tehran, throwing all of this into disarray.
And by the way, the question here, how could the world allow Israel to kill the person who was negotiating with them about ceasefire? We didn't hear condemnation of the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, nor did we hear condemnation of the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. If tomorrow somebody assassinates Netanyahu, will we see the same reaction? This double standard has to end. And the question here, in my opinion, the people who support Israel in this terrible manner and ignore the Israeli crimes are hurting Israel in the long run. Because at the end of the day, this situation will not lead only to Palestinian victims, but victims from both sides.
There are no winners in this. Mustafa Barghouti, pleasure to have you on Al Jazeera. Thank you.
Thank you.